Hi guys, welcome back to Project Unstuck. This is episode 6, and I am so excited for today's guest. I've been looking forward to interviewing her for a long time now, so this is a really big treat for me. So I am joined with Dulma Alton. She is a TikTok creator and founder of Make Lane, a private community for women e-commerce and DTC founders. She creates content at the intersection of DTC, which is direct to consumer, entrepreneurship, and talent-led brands with a focus on female-founded companies. So thank you again, Dulma, for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So let's now dive into, before we actually start talking about, the specifics of your journey, let's talk about, give people an understanding of what was your career journey so far? Is there, what were the big standout moments?
Yeah, it started with Google. So before Google, I actually had an internship that really shaped things for me. It was at a branding agency called Red Antler. They worked with a lot of big direct consumer brands like Allbirds and Casper and Rent the Runway and Birchbox. And I loved the exposure to Silicon Valley that internship gave me. And I loved being sort of witness to the brand storytelling kind of development process, like figuring out what a brand should say and what it should look like. So that was really intriguing to me. And then I graduated from college. My first job out of college was at Google, basically supporting AdWords customers. I was not there super long because I loved the company and I loved my team and I loved the culture, but I knew that being at a really big organization was just not the right fit for me. So I left and I kind of was doing marketing for different startups, just trying to figure things out. And I'm sure we'll dive into like how stuck and lost and confused I felt for a while there. But in 2017, I started my first business, a clean fragrance retail store called Potion. We carried all these beautiful botanical artisan niche perfumes from award-winning perfumeries around the world. I partnered with an influencer to get it off the ground, which was my first exposure to how helpful that kind of partnership can be for distribution. And I just bootstrapped that for a couple of years and wore almost all the hats and was, hauling boxes of fragrance with me from San Francisco to LA when I moved there and, storing it all in my closet and fulfilling the little sample orders myself and just, very scrappy operation, but trying to make it look as legit as possible on the outside, which is what you often have to do as a small business owner. And that taught me a lot. Both about sort of like e-commerce and running a business, but also just about how hard it is to get a business off the ground and materialize an idea that you have in your mind's eye into the world and get it off the ground as far as traction and marketing. So that was helpful. And then I remember while I was running that business and I just moved to LA thinking, I wish I could commiserate with and learn from other women who were similar founders in the beauty space or the CPG space, just dealing with physical products, because I think every industry is, different. There are obviously business principles that apply from industry to industry, but there are also nuances to different industries, right? Coaching is different from CPG, which is different from finance. And so in e-commerce and direct to consumer, I remember really needing a community, but not seeing anything that was even half women, honestly, but definitely not all women. So I decided to start my own community. And then that grew to almost 2,000 women around the world at all different stages with beauty brands, fashion brands, CPG brands. Some had raised tons of venture capital. Some were totally bootstrapped. And they were just all so inspiring to me. And so I started to feel very strongly about how do I make this community as valuable as possible. And at the time I was working on Potion. So, still working on my business, doing all kinds of freelancing to pay the bills. And I was spending probably increasingly more and more of my time, if not most of my time, on this community, because even though it was not something I was doing to make money, I was just so passionate about it. And I'm somebody who, for better or worse, I just kind of follow where my energy goes, follow where my passion is. And I am willing to just kind of like pull, the cord on everything else and just sort of follow whatever feels exciting to me, and also where I feel like I can add a lot of value and contribute to other people. And so I was working on this community and bringing in different guest speakers to teach very tactical workshops, because that's what I felt like was missing. There's a lot of, great storytelling out there that's inspiring, like how I built this, or there's, stuff that is maybe a little bit more general, but there wasn't a lot of good tactical information about e-commerce and how to set up the right Facebook ad strategy for an e-commerce brand in 2019, which is when I was running this or started this, or how to figure out your logistics, right? If you're on a budget, like all of that stuff is very specialized knowledge. And I thought, why don't I just create a space where all of the people who are the experts at this stuff can come in and just teach this stuff live to my community? And that was the idea. And the other part of it that was important to me, and this has been kind of a through line of a lot of my life, including my undergrad studies at Brown, where I studied kind of international development, is how do I democratize access to resources, in this case, knowledge that isn't readily available to everybody necessarily. And so that really was motivating for me. And in a way, that's what I'm doing now with my TikTok. But I was doing that and then eventually had to pivot away from Potion because I realized this is not a scalable or profitable business. I'm losing money on this and I can't afford to be losing money right now because I'm bootstrapping this and I've just moved to LA. And at the time I was taking care of my mom and there was a lot going on. So I decided to pivot to really turning this community into a business. And that's how Make Lane was born. All of it was very organic. And there was demand there too, because I would bring in certain kinds of experts to teach workshops and courses. And people would say, oh, can you also do a workshop on this, or have you considered creating a mastermind so I can meet other women and really sort of get to know their businesses and that kind of thing. So I just learned a whole lot from that process. I mean, talking to hundreds of the women in our community, every time in the early days, every time somebody would join, and this was on Facebook, I would message them and ask them, can I get on a call with you? Or if you're in LA, can I buy you some coffee so I can just learn everything about your business? And it was a very sort of not scalable strategy, but I loved it and it taught me a lot. So that's something I would recommend, by the way, to people who are just starting a community or anything like that, is don't be afraid to just spend so much time learning about people's stories, challenges, desires, motivations. You're going to absorb so much that's going to serve you in a way that you can't if you just send out a survey, right? Like there's a place for that. There's also a place for deeper conversations. So I was doing that and I learned a lot from that, and also the over 100 experts we brought in to teach all kinds of workshops. And because of that, about a year ago, I started posting on TikTok just to kind of learn the platform. And I also wanted to get over my fear of being seen and putting myself out there. So I decided to start posting on TikTok every day for 100 days in a row, at least once a day. And by week 3, I was kind of following trends loosely, making what I thought were funny videos about being a founder. But TikTok apparently didn't think so because they weren't really going anywhere.
Oh, I love
but
that.
I was having fun. And I already sort of locked myself into this challenge and told all my friends about it. So I was like, well, got to keep going. But I remember thinking, I want to create the content I wish I saw, which is storytelling and business news and analyses about female founded companies, because a lot of business content out there is about men inevitably, because a lot of, CEOs and leaders and investors and et cetera, like people in the world of business who are prominent, who are the subject of a lot of these pieces, tend to be men. And so I thought, I'm always looking for stories about female founded companies and female CEOs and leaders and executives. So why don't I create that content on TikTok? So I started to do that. And at the time, nobody was doing that. Nobody was doing the green screen business analysis type stuff. And I remember thinking, gosh, I don't even know if anyone's going to like this, because I don't see this on TikTok. Like, this is probably a little too niche. It's probably like not going to find an audience, but I'm already doing this challenge, so why not? And I remember thinking, I have to make this interesting somehow for TikTok. So how do I, feed the beast of the algorithm? And I thought, why don't I talk about the Kardashians? And that's how I started talking about celebrity and influencer-led brands. And I think sometimes, because that's such a focus of my content now, people think, oh, were you involved in that world? But it was really just me trying to figure out how to make business more engaging and interesting and binge-worthy on TikTok. And I settled on, celebrities. And it worked. One of my first videos about business was about the Kardashians businesses. And I think to this day is my most viewed video at like 2.3 or 2.4 million views. And then that just kind of built my traction. And from there, I haven't stopped. And now I'm kind of a full-time creator. And everything I've really done up until this point is, especially with Make Lane and the TikTok content, and even Potion in a way, is to celebrate other entrepreneurs and creatives. That's what I love to do. With Potion, I want to tell the stories of these perfumers because I think they're genius and deserve more of a platform. With Make Lane, how do I provide education to these women founders? And with the TikTok, it's a little bit more broad, but it's the same thing. So I would say that that's my North Star. I just gave you the really, really long version, but I hope that fills
No,
things in.
I love that. And we're going to get into all of it. And it's honestly such an impressive career journey. And what I find really interesting is that on the outside, just looking in, it seems like you have had such incredible success and that you would just be, you know, feeling great about your career. But before we even got on this call, you had told me that you were feeling stuck for most of your 20s,
Yeah.
which is that spans most of the sort of different career points that we just covered. So that's what I really want to unpack. And I think that's also really interesting that, you know, you wouldn't expect that from you. And I think I saw a TikTok of yours where you kind of address this. And that's what I think is the challenge when we're stuck is we don't always know we're stuck. We don't always see it. Other people don't see it. So we can't get that support. So now that we are sort of like we've laid it all out on the table, what is what is the first moment in your career where you did feel stuck? Was that at Google or was that after you had left?
That was definitely on Google. I applied to Google. I knew I wanted to be in Silicon Valley. At least I knew that's where I wanted to start my career because I knew I eventually wanted to be in the world of entrepreneurship somehow, do my own thing, be my own boss. I always loved being creative and sort of problem solving and just the autonomy that comes with entrepreneurship. So I knew I eventually wanted to get there, but I think there was a time when I was, in college and fresh out of college, understandably, where I felt like, okay, I need to build some skills, acquire some knowledge, and then I can do that. And I think that's right for some, not necessarily for everybody, but in my case, I thought, okay, why don't I apply to big tech? And at the time, I was applying to a few startups, a few bigger companies. Actually, Google was the only large big tech company I applied to, and I got a job there, and I was super excited about that. And I thought, okay, this is going to make my family proud because I'm an immigrant, and that means a lot to immigrant families, understandably. And then it's also going to be a good place where I can learn and meet people and maybe find some mentorship. And I am also going to be able to help businesses. And that was, I think, one of the important parts where I had a little bit of a misunderstanding about what the role was really going to be about. It was essentially sort of like supporting small businesses that use AdWords and creating campaigns and, using analytics and setting up their video ads or whatever, right? So everything to do with AdWords, which is a huge part of the revenue driver of Google. And because of that, because it's such an established part of that organization, it's sort of something where they bring in a lot of, smart, hungry, savvy, like young people into these entry level positions, and they train them up quickly. And you're pretty replaceable. It's very sort of, you're a cog in the machine, which is fine. But for me, that wasn't a fit. And so I went into that and realized, oh, I'm not really helping these businesses the way I like envisioned. And so should I stay here or should I go? And that really tormented me for a while because I knew pretty quickly that it wasn't right for me. But I remember thinking like it would be so shameful to leave so quickly. I have to write it out. I have to like clock in my like year and a half, 2 years, whatever. And I remember just physically, like on a soul level, feeling like I can't do that. I can't do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be here. I think it's right for other people, but it's not right for me. It's not where I want to be. And I battled that for a while. I was asking other people for advice, but really what I was hoping they would do is sort of like give me permission to leave. And nobody was giving me that permission. People were like, you should probably stay. And I was like, oh no.
Exactly what happened to me. That's so funny. I can understand that.
Yeah. And I was just starting to see that it wasn't really serving anyone, that I was staying there and sort of not super engaged, not really sort of feeling like I was expressing my gifts and feeling just like uninspired. And so ultimately I walked away. But I think that what helped me do that is I didn't want to just leave and not know what to do with myself. I thought, okay, well, if I have this inkling that I want to do something more entrepreneurial and creative, then let me start to kind of set that up and explore that. And the idea for that, which is funny because it was almost like a hybrid of Potion and Makelane, but it was this idea of what if I created this website similar to like like a goop or a violet gray or something where I would curate all these brands that are founded by women and tell their stories. There would be a strong editorial component, so very sort of content wedded with commerce, and that was what I was passionate about. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do that. So let me start to put that together. And maybe the folks can be on clean beauty and wellness brands. And I started to work on that. And then I realized there are about like 3 or 4 other brands that are way better funded that are already doing this and have a lot of traction. So I wouldn't be actually sort of contributing I wouldn't be creating new value in the market. And that's something that's important to me. So I abandoned that, but I left anyway. And it kind of all, started to come back. I do think that the themes that sometimes come up for us tend to come up over and over again. And it's okay if it doesn't work the first time around, because it might come back in a different form as things change, as we grow, as our skills develop, as platforms change. So that's what happened for me. But Google is where I felt really stuck, because that was sort of where I had to start to let go of a lot of immigrant guilt that I had, where I just felt so so obligated to stay because of all the sacrifices that my mom made to be here, and my family's expectations. But again, ultimately and it's been years of working through a lot of this inner stuff, which I think is integral to getting unstuck. But I think that stuff, like, ultimately, I believe that when we are in the roles where we can fully be expressed and contribute to other people and serve people in a way that is not, replaceable, I think that everybody is better off ultimately. And so I think these voices in our heads that tell us like, you're bad for following your own passions, like, that's how we can start to silence them and kind of dissolve them.
So how did you really make that leap? Like, what were the sort of, maybe it was like mental steps you went through, or different strategies? Because you had mentioned that coming from an immigrant family, you have a lot of pressure to succeed, or you felt that. And so making the move to quit Google must have been a really difficult decision for you. But how did you get to that point? Were there any sort of reflective exercises that you did that helped you understand, I have to make this move now as opposed to, 2 years from now?
Yeah. I think one thing I do want to acknowledge is that it really helped that my mom was supportive. I'm super close to my mom, and she was so supportive to the extent that when I actually finally quit and I came home one day, because I was, helping caregive for her in the Bay Area in Marin County. And so I came home and she was setting up all these Christmas lights, and it was not anywhere close to the holidays. And I was like, Mom, what are you doing? She's like, we have to celebrate because you quit to follow your dreams. And it was the sweetest thing. It was the sweetest. I'm going to cry just thinking about it now, but that really helped. And I think that's such a blessing. And so finding somebody who can be in your corner and really like leaning on them, I think that's really important. And, not everybody has that. And sometimes even if you do have that, you also have to do that for yourself. So I think that kind of practice, like intentionally, even if at first it feels fake, you have to just be your own best cheerleader and tell yourself you're on the right track. It's okay. You deserve to be happy. You deserve to do what you want. It's okay to fail. You'll figure it out. It's okay to not know. You'll figure it out. Like, all these things that we wish other people would say to us, we have to learn to say to ourselves. At least that's what I believe, and that's what has helped me. So that's one. And then the other thing that helped is, I think there's a part of me, I developed this trust and solidified it over time. But even at the time, and this was like 2015, I think I still had this inkling, these stirrings of trust in myself and in the vision that I felt like was true for my life. Like, I felt like, oh, I'm here to do something more creative, something bigger, something meaningful, something entrepreneurial. Like, I just have that feeling. And I think at the time I just trusted it. And I trusted that even if I let go of that opportunity, that things would work out for me, and that I wasn't, that I was pivoting from the right place, not just a place of, I don't feel like doing this for whatever reason, or it's hard, but this is not my path. And I can feel that, and I'm going to trust that, even if the trust was very wobbly.
So you had that gut feeling that something wasn't right. And I think that's where a lot of people will get stuck, is they feel something's wrong, but they don't know why. But you had a better understanding of that. And it sounds like you are very tapped into your intuition, and you can really connect with that. So that gives you that kind of clarity. And so I think that is really important. And for people that maybe don't have that, you know, deep connection with their intuition, are maybe afraid to take that leap, even though they feel something is wrong. Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I developed this intuition definitely over time. But and also the trust, right? Sometimes the issue is not that we don't have the intuition or we don't have the answers, it's that we don't trust ourselves or we're afraid to
Mhm.
trust ourselves. So I think that's the other thing we need to distinguish is, do you not know what you want to do and who you are and what your true desires are, or are you just afraid to confront the truth? And that's okay. It's so understandable. It's so understandable. It's so human to be afraid. But at the same time, we need to acknowledge that it's fear that's holding us back, not uncertainty. But sometimes it is uncertainty, right? Because we need to experience things and try things in order to figure it out. And that's also one takeaway I want to share for anybody who, especially who feels like they're at the beginning of their career or in their 20s or just, trying to figure it out, is it's okay to try different things. Like, how else are you going to know? I have always found it to be strangely arbitrary that we will pick a random job, the first job that will, first company that will offer us a job, straight out of college or while we're in college, and then like feel obligated to stay there for a certain amount of time. And it all ends up being this sort of weird, like, thing where we feel tied to these companies and don't value the importance of learning and experimentation. That is what you owe yourself in your 20s, and you're still so young. You don't have to have it all figured out, and the only way you're ultimately going to figure it out is by trying different things, trying projects, trying jobs, right? Like, yeah. So I think that is, at least I wish somebody told me that when I was 22, 23. I just felt like, why am I like, I should be sticking to these things. But now I realize, actually, no, every single pivot, every single change, every single transition, every single project, every single job, it all led up to where I am now in a perfect way. And I couldn't have predicted that, but I just kind of like followed my gut. And I think, like, I wouldn't know as much about who I am as a person and as a professional and as sort of like a person in the world who wants to add value if I hadn't tried all those things. So I just got really carried away and I forgot your question.
No, I'm loving this. I literally just got chills when you were talking about that because I agree with that so wholeheartedly. And I think the challenge is, and you mentioned this, is we sort of pick our career path before our brains have even finished developing.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I chose this major, like I chose to be a business major when I was a junior. And now I concentrated in marketing. Okay, great. Now I have all of this time and money invested in this career. Now
Yeah.
you graduate, you get a job in this career path. And the longer that we're in that same path, which again, we picked before our brains were even developed and we had that chance to explore and experiment,
Totally.
this is why I think so many people lose touch with their true selves and what they really want and need from a career. And this is why I believe they also end up in these mismatched careers, which is what happened to you, or at least what happened to me. And it sounds like it's what happened to you as well. Um, so after you quit Google,
Mhm.
now you are, what were you doing at this point?
Yeah. So I was freelancing for different startups, kind of helping them with marketing, which was nice. It was flexible. It gave me some space to figure my stuff out. Also, I would say, and I don't know that this is sort of like what people would relate to, but I like, frankly, a big part of what helped me get to this point of clarity and trust, and even like saying, you know what, I'm just going to post on TikTok. I'm a 29-year-old woman who's just going to start randomly making TikToks for no reason, and I'm going to do it every single day for 100 days. Like, all of that kind of weird bravado came because I was willing to clear out a lot of stuff, do a lot of inner work, focus on my spiritual practices and beliefs and inner beliefs and sort of like mindset. Like, all of that work was so valuable and it was foundational, and it took years. It really is the work of a lifetime. But I think sometimes people just want the answers, they want the opportunity, they want the success, but they don't realize that you have to actually like meet the universe halfway by doing a lot of the inner work, clearing out a lot of the stuff. And so that's what, like, being, a freelancer doing marketing kind of afforded me, which was a lot of time and flexibility to be kind of diving deep into all that stuff and kind of like working through it. At the time, I was just kind of like working through it because I felt like I had to, but now I realize again, it was perfect. It all kind of worked out perfectly. But and still, like, there are always like levels to, right? You always have to like graduate to higher levels of needing to like work through deeper and deeper stuff. But yeah, that's what I was doing. So like for for income to pay the bills. I was doing freelance marketing. But what I was also spending a lot of time on was I was writing, I was reading a lot, I was reading a lot from people who talk a lot about creativity, who talk a lot about entrepreneurship. And I was just kind of following my like enthusiasm and interests and sort of trying to figure out like, is this feeling that I feel where I can have this path that feels so effortless for me. Like I'm just like the world is just, giving me full permission to express my gifts and do what I enjoy doing. Like, is that possible? Or am I crazy and delusional? And for a while I was like, no, I think I'm delusional. But now I'm like, no, I was right.
Yeah. So you had mentioned the inner work, and I couldn't agree more. You have to really work on, and this is what I did as well. When I was doing marketing coaching a little while ago, sometime last year, I kind of hit a wall with it and I wasn't really getting a ton of leads. I was feeling really stuck in that sort of coaching position I was in. And so I too took a step back from coaching. I did tons of inner work. I did a ton of reflective work. I hired a coach and I kind of went back to the like IP development stage and figuring out, what is it that is my core message? What do I really want to help people with? But the inner work was half that battle, right? And I agree with that. It's like you can't achieve that next level of success if you haven't tackled the demons that we have, not demons necessarily, but sort of the shadow sides that could be holding us back, because new levels, new devils. So what's maybe one sort of piece of advice that you can give for someone that's trying to begin or continue doing this inner work?
Yeah. I think just examine all your fears really closely. Fear is ultimately the thing that can hold us back. And that fear can be around things that maybe are more like unsurprising, like, oh, I'm afraid of failure. I'm afraid of being humiliated. I'm afraid of financial risk. I'm afraid of, there are like fears that are more typical that are maybe a little easier to spot. And that doesn't mean it's easier to work through them, but they're more obvious. And there can also be fears that are kind of unexpected, I think, like the fear of like family stuff, right? Family stuff can come up, stuff about identity. I'm not a kind of person who does this. I'm the kind of person who does that. And then having to let go of that story, that identity, that can be very painful and very difficult and it's also really hard to see that stuff. It's hard to like identify and acknowledge that stuff. So just kind of like taking a lot of time, and it's not going to happen in one session. It's really going to take time, but like it's important to prioritize that, especially if you feel stuck, by like journaling or whatever kind of reflection helps you, talking to a coach or finding somebody who can really help you excavate all those fears and bring them from like the unconscious or subconscious layer up into your conscious, so you can start to even just acknowledge them. And very often just acknowledging them and realizing that they're there and realizing what they even are, that can be like 50% of the work, because then they get dislodged and they start to dissolve over time. So that's what's been helpful for me, because things that were holding me back were so unexpected. Things like, oh, I feel like I feel like I can't let go of this immigrant story of struggle. That was like a big one for me. It was really interesting, where I was almost like attached to the story of struggle because it shaped my story of my identity for so long, that it was almost like there was some part of me that was invested in staying stuck, staying confused, staying not that successful. And that's a whole other can of worms. But like the point being, when you really sort of like take the time to understand yourself and what's beneath that conscious layer, you can uncover a lot of stuff that might be surprising, but it's important to work through, because it will really sort of clear out a lot of debris and impact a lot of different areas of your life.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I feel like we share so many different beliefs. And guys, if you are trying to get clear on what are my fears, what are my limiting beliefs, what is holding me back, be sure to click the link below to join Project Unstuck so that you can access all of these course materials for free. We basically have a worksheet for, I think it was episode 3, that walks through how to actually identify what your limiting beliefs are, what your fears are, where they came from, and then work on rewiring them. So be sure to click the link below for that. I want to now jump to Potion. So was Potion another kind of juncture in your career where you felt stuck? Obviously not right away, but eventually did you find yourself stuck there?
So I didn't feel stuck necessarily with Potion. I mean, as a business, it was a tough business to start, and I think there's maybe a way that it could have worked, but we didn't have the right business model. So sometimes, you start a business and it doesn't actually pan out. Very often that's the case, and that was the case with Potion. But I didn't actually feel stuck with Potion per se. It's more that, like, the best way I can describe it is throughout my 20s up until quite recently, I felt like I was working on the projects that felt meaningful to me, and they were not the wrong projects, but I felt like there was something deeper or bigger that it almost felt like an appointment that I was late for, that I forgot about, that I was like, what, I have to be somewhere and I don't know what it is. And I don't know like exactly what time, I don't know the location geographically, but I feel this sense of urgency and I feel like I'm not there yet. And it was it was something that I couldn't repress. It was something that I couldn't ignore. It was just so visceral for me. And so, like, I kept feeling that even as I was trying my best to honor sort of like the creative inspiration that was coming up for me and wanting to work on Potion, and then realizing, oh, like there's an opportunity to create a community here. I was so energized by, working on Make Lane, serving the women in our community. I loved that. But like, there was something that was slightly off. Not the whole time, but now I think I'm realizing, oh, it was the right thing to be working on, but I needed to give myself greater permission to do it on my terms. And that's what I feel like I'm doing now with TikTok. So I think sometimes we can be kind of like close, it's like playing a game of like hot and cold. Like you just have to follow the clues, right? Because very likely the path that is like our path is not going to have this like divine blueprint that's like step by step, right? Not like IKEA instructions for how to build like your friggin' couch. So I am thinking about furniture because I was building some furniture yesterday and it was such a pain.
Yeah, it's a great metaphor. I love it.
But we're not gonna necessarily always get that blueprint. Like some people, feel called to a path that is more sort of like outlined for them, and that's great. And other people are not. And I think that scares them. And they think, no, I want to find shelter and safety in the career that is more, kind of like lined up for me, like being a nurse or a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. That's great. That's fine. But if that's not if that's not quite right for you, don't just like flock to the path that feels more certain just because you want certainty, because you'll be okay. Like by and large, we are all living. I mean, very likely a lot of the people who will be listening to this, like you have a roof over your head, right? You have food on the table, you have probably some sort of a smartphone. And if like, I saw this tweet today, somebody commented on one of my tweets. They said, if you have an iPhone and a work ethic, you can do so much. And it really is true. Yeah. So all that to say, like, the path may not always be clear, but just taking one step at a time. And I think that that's what I've always been willing to do. And with Potion, that's what I was still doing with all these different things, these twists and turns. That's what I was doing. But I was also at the same time feeling a little bit unsettled about this isn't exactly right. And I was always willing to follow that. And at the time I thought, am I defective in some way because I can't stick to something? But now I realize, no, it was actually guidance. It was guidance, not delusion.
Yes, that's so important. I think we try to force ourselves sometimes to stay on the path that we think we should. And this was actually something I was talking about with our guest last week, who really is she's a clinical psychologist, and she helps people with burnout and perfectionism. And one of the things I asked her, what's your piece of advice for people that are feeling stuck? And she said, forget the shoulds, drop the shoulds. What we think we should do is not in line with our actual values and passions. And I think when we're operating from that place of should and what makes everyone around us happy and what seems the most successful on the surface, it's almost like we're bound to end up stuck and unhappy. Mm-hmm. And so you ended up sort of creating content on TikTok, right? Yeah. And you mentioned clarity a lot. Did creating for TikTok help you gain clarity on your path, the thing that was sort of in your heart that was beckoning you, but you weren't quite sure what it was?
Yeah, it did in a way. So I think I always like there has been the through line of Make Lane and like I said, like even Potion to a degree and the TikTok, it's all how do I serve other entrepreneurs and creatives, especially women who I have a soft spot for. Like that kind of empowerment in women, their financial freedom, economic freedom, creative expression, all of that, that is my North Star. And I've sort of tried to chip away at it in different ways. I've kind of tried to approach it from different angles, but that's been the through line. And then with TikTok, I think what like it gave me clarity in the sense of, oh, I'm still kind of like following this North Star, this same North Star, but now I'm doing it in a way that just feels so like, I don't want to say effortless because it's hard work. That's not what I mean. Like it's work in the sense of I have to put in hours to do the research. And there are elements to being a creator that are it's joyful, it's great, it's a dream job, but it's not necessarily just, effortless. But effortless in the sense that I felt like it was my element. And I think that kind of gave me this clarity of, oh, it can feel like that. It can feel like this is stuff that kind of comes easily to me and I really enjoy doing it and I'm getting rewarded for it. And also it just felt like something finally clicked into place because a lot of the other things I've done up until then, basically everything I did up until then after graduating just felt a little bit like an uphill climb. Like it wasn't like I was hitting a wall, kind of like what you were saying. Like sometimes we kind of hit a wall and things aren't really flowing and then we have to step back and reevaluate. That's what my entire 20s felt like. It felt like I think I'm doing the right things and I think I'm smart and capable, but somehow this is really hard. And then with TikTok, it just felt easy. It just felt like it was flowing. It just felt like doors were opening. It just felt like all these opportunities were coming my way. And it just felt like there was all this positive feedback snowballing all the time. So that is also, I think, a really good signal when it feels like you're just kind of like gliding downhill and it's like easy and smooth. Like it's not always going to feel like smooth sailing, but there's a certain kind of sense of being in flow and you being in your element that is going to make opportunities kind of like come to you. You're going to magnetize them. Doors are going to open for you. And that's a really magical feeling. And I think it's important to say like, I deserve that. I'm going to hold out for that. So I think that is what clicked for me. And that gave me clarity.
What you said about how TikTok helped you both gain those opportunities and the feedback from your community, that helped you. And I think that's something that I really believe, and why personal branding is a way I believe to get unstuck is because when you are creating high value content and you're adding value without expectations, you're just sort of helping solve people's problems. You're sharing your personal story. You're being vulnerable. You're adding value again. Then you begin to sort of magnetize yourself for opportunities and for positive feedback from your audience. So let's start there with the positive feedback. How quickly did you start seeing that, and how did that affect you?
I started seeing positive feedback as soon as I started talking about business, which was 3 weeks into the journey. So almost exactly a year ago. And it was unlike anything I've ever experienced. Because first of all, it's just weird to have your content gain a lot of viewers. It's like it's an inherently unnatural thing. The social media is an inherently unnatural thing. And when your videos go viral and a bunch of strangers are commenting all kinds of things in your comments, it just is like surprising in a way, because it's like, wow, this, like, when else do you ever have that? And so it was surprising. It was really lovely because they were by and large such positive comments. And I think often what I felt, especially in the beginning, was, I don't know if this is going to be useful to anyone. I don't like it. This is probably obvious, but I'm going to share this anyway. And then I would still get a lot of positive feedback and people saying, you've helped me in my business so much, or I send your videos to my entire team, or, can I hire you, or what have you. So that felt like such lovely feedback, not just because it validated that I was adding value, but also, again, it was kind of like the universe was telling me, like, yes, keep going, like, this is good, like, you are doing the right thing. And so that was really great. And then there are also elements of it that are kind of like unexpected and not necessarily a pleasant way, but those are very marginal. I mean, trolls and weird, people kind of like having a negative day and taking it out on you and that kind of stuff. Honestly, it's like a blip on the radar. So
right, in comparison to the amazing messages that you get. And that's how I found that sense of fulfillment after I had taken a leave of absence from Google, because I was incredibly burnt out. I was super unfulfilled. The work I was doing just really wasn't a good match for me, which is why I think I ended up burnt out. I started creating on TikTok, started adding value, and then the messages that I would receive, the comments, that gave me a sense of fulfillment I had never felt before, especially from in the traditional career. So that's another benefit, guys, of creating content and adding value. You are going to start, not only do you get the opportunities, but you get this deep sense of fulfillment and satisfaction when you see that you are making a positive impact on someone's life at any point in the world, right? And that's the cool part. So you mentioned opportunities as well. When did you start seeing those opportunities? Because I know a lot of people are going to say, well, do I have to blow up? Do I have to gain 50,000 followers before I start seeing opportunities? So when did those start showing up for you? And then, what were they?
Yeah. So, I just want to say one thing about what you were saying previously about adding value. I think that's so important. I think a lot of people go into creating content thinking like, oh, I want to be viral. I want to be like a TikTok star. But I don't think that is, first of all, like, I think if that's your main motivation, I think you should step back and really examine that and reflect on that. Not that it's bad. I think like it's human, but it's important to like work through that stuff and then come back to content in a place where you're not just emotionally and psychologically dependent on the numbers going up or down, right? So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, I don't think it's as effective anymore because a lot of people create content from that space or that kind of like lifestyle general content. And that's fine if you're hitting a niche and doing something really different and really just expressing your own energy. But I think when people are doing it to try to sort of like game the algorithm, it just ends up kind of looking like a lot of other content out there. Whereas if you do it from a place of service, you are probably coming from a place of, oh, I don't see like, the people have these questions, people have these needs, people have these challenges, I want to help. And that's always going to be the stuff that reliably hits, right? Even as TikTok matures and you can't just become Addison Rae overnight, the same way that you could in 2020, there's still going to be space for adding value. So that I think is the right orientation to have, and it's more reliable, it's more effective. And then as far as the opportunities, I can't say exactly when, but it was late 2020. It was sort of like a few months into creating content. And even now I don't have that many followers. I mean, TikTok is a platform where you can go from nothing to like 1 million in, a few months. And I haven't had that at all. In fact, my growth has been kind of like a slow burn, because now I'm at something like 95,000, which is significant. And I don't mean to downplay that at all. But what the point I want to make is, it's about quality, not quantity. And it's about hitting a niche that you feel like you can address and doing it in a way that's fresh and interesting and important and valuable. And I think that kind of like adding value, especially if you can do it in a niche that is less saturated on TikTok, that can be really great, because more people are going to flock to TikTok and more people are realizing it's not just a Gen Z app for, dancing videos. So there's going to be opportunity for all kinds of content. And there's still sort of like this arbitrage window, which is what I feel like I've been able to tap into with my business content, even though I thought nobody's going to care about me talking about venture capital, but they did. And including people in the industry. So that's how I got the opportunities, because I was frankly, I think I was like the first person to kind of talk about the kinds of brands and the kinds of like talent-led and direct consumer brands that I was. And then I was sprinkling in some content about venture capital and entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley. And because I was kind of like first mover there, especially with the format that I do and the sort of like long form for TikTok analyses that I do, I think because of that, I was able to attract a lot of industry people, a lot of operators, founders, marketers, VCs, people in finance, private equity, et cetera, who are in those spaces of consumer brands and retail, et cetera, beauty, fashion. And I think that is an interesting sort of, it's not something I did intentionally. I was just talking about what I knew to talk about, what I felt excited about, what I love nerding out about, that probably my friends want me to shut up about. So I was like, let me just tell the internet and I'll find my people. Like I was just doing that. And then it happened to be a space where probably a lot of people who are on TikTok, who are in some of those professional sectors, don't see a lot of other content that resonates with them and that hits those sort of like areas. And so when they saw my content, it was more likely that they would be engaged, they would follow me, they would become like loyal followers, and then they would reach out and say, hi, do you want to speak on this panel? Or do you want to, like co-host this event? Or do you want to do this, interview? Or do you want to be profiled in this like publication? Like I got a lot of press in the beginning that was all organic. None of it, I never thought to like be like, I'm going to reach out to journalists and say like, hey, please write about me. Like, that's just not where my head was at. I was just like, oh my God, there are so many brands people are requesting that I talk about. How do I make the time? And so I was just on that treadmill. But yeah, those were some of the opportunities. And then also, a lot of consulting opportunities, many of which I've said no to, some of which I've said yes to. Do you want to be a co-founder of this particular brand? Do you want to, help us at this VC firm? A lot of things in the industry that have been really exciting, especially because I think there are opportunities that I might have been interested in before, but that would have been probably far more unattainable for me. But I think creating content is just such a great way to showcase your expertise, your authority, your credibility, and that can open a lot of doors and bring those opportunities to you instead of you having to seek them out. So
yeah. And guys, I think the other thing that she mentioned that's so important is that when you are building your personal brand and you're creating content, you are attracting so many different opportunities, and many of which you would have never thought of had they not been presented to you first. And that's why it's great, because they almost act as clues towards your most, aligned path and the thing that will make you most satisfied. And so I wanted to touch on your podcast, which you just recently started, right? Is this
somewhat recently? It was in August, and then I've been very inconsistent.
August, okay. But I saw your post about this on TikTok. Do you feel like because you built your personal brand that it helped you launch this podcast and have more success with it?
Totally. Yeah. So the funny thing about the podcast is I was afraid to do one for a long time because I love podcasts so much. And I thought if I ever do one, it has to be really different. It has to be really good. And probably that's keeping me stuck in a perfectionist loop. But anyway, I have always flirted with the idea of doing one, but I didn't want to just do something that was like 10 other podcasts out there. So I kind of held off on it, and I thought, okay, maybe long-term. But since I started posting on TikTok, I would get so many requests to do a podcast. People would always be like, do you have a podcast? When are you going to launch a podcast? Please do a podcast. I would get those requests all the time, to the point where I thought, okay, you know what? Like, I'm getting the organic demand, and that's such a privileged position to be in. So, and like, I'm all about serving what my followers want. So I should do this. And that was actually, such a blessing, because I think, if I had started it sooner, it would have been just such an uphill climb to try to get even the first, 10 listeners. But it's still going to be like that because it's a new podcast, but it was, the TikTok just, I think, like, especially the kind of content I create on TikTok, it's a perfect fit for sort of like a longer form expansion in a podcast format. So that was like an accidentally strategic thing that I did.
So we're running out of time, but what is your last piece or pieces of advice that you can give to anyone who's feeling stuck, whether that be in an unfulfilling career or just that sort of endless, futile job search?
Yeah. I would say the most important relationship you have is the one with yourself, and you need to treat that like you would any other precious relationship, which is one in which you get to know that person and ask them what their hopes are, fears are, desires are, dreams are. Like, really take that time. Don't just take it for granted that because if you're feeling stuck, chances are there's more clarity to be gained. And so what I would do is take time for that relationship, prioritize that relationship the way you would with a romantic partnership, where you set aside time, ideally every week, right? You have date night, you talk to each other, you work through things together. Like, that is what I would recommend. So what that could look like is, every week setting aside some time to like journal and work through some big questions. What are my fears? What are my hopes? What are my dreams? What do I really want? If I didn't need to ask for anyone's permission, if I didn't have to be qualified in the way that I think I do, if there weren't all these, limitations and constraints that I am inheriting from society or placing on myself or borrowing from my family, if I just cut out all that noise, let's say I get to have whatever I want, what would that look like? Like, that is an exercise that was a game changer for me. Like, even imagine like a typical day in your dream life. That's one that I personally like. That actually inspired me to create TikTok content, because I was imagining sort of like what a typical ideal day in my life would look like. And somehow I had this image of me making green smoothies in the morning while going live to an audience on my phone. And I was talking to like all these great, smart, kind, ambitious women all over the world. And I was like, oh, so that's what I want to do. So that's how I realized, oh, maybe I do want to create content, because I'd never considered that before. So like, take some time to get to know yourself is the biggest thing. And also be willing to look at the scary stuff. Like there's going to be stuff, if you're feeling stuck, very likely there's going to be stuff that's like harder to look at or harder to work through, because I personally believe that very often when we're feeling really, really stuck, some of that is like, fundamentally we are wise. Sometimes we can get disconnected from ourselves, but we are wise and we know ourselves to a degree, and it might be a little bit buried beneath all the noise and the static. But if we are brave enough to ask ourselves, like, what do I know? Like there might be a lot of, chatter in your mind saying, I don't know what to do, I don't know who I am, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to do that. But like, pause all of that and ask yourself, what do I know? What do I know about myself? What are the clues I have? Just go off of those clues. You don't need to have the entire path illuminated. You just have to know that very first step. It can be tiny, but that's all you need to know. So that's the advice I would give.
That's such great advice. And I agree completely. But guys, again, the exercises that she's mentioned, as well as the dream career and life exercises, are all in episode 3's worksheet. So check that out.
That's perfect. By the way, we didn't collude on this.
No, I love that as well, is because I think a big issue when we find ourselves stuck is we start to thrash. We try a bunch of different things and we burn ourselves out in the process because we don't have the clarity, that personal clarity on our values, on our fears, on our superpowers. And so that's also the work that I did. And that's sort of what we're going through in Project Unstuck. So again, be sure to subscribe. But that clarity in who you are and what you need, what you want, figure that out first, right? Because then we have that, and then we can move slowly and with intention and actually begin to make progress as opposed to just spinning our wheels. I really believe that when we find ourselves stuck, it's almost like we step into quicksand, where every sort of additional wriggle and when we're frantically moving kind of makes us more and more stuck. And so and when to get unstuck from quicksand, it's almost the same thing in our careers. You have to move slowly and with intention, but you also need to move backwards first. You take a step back towards solid land. And that's almost what we're talking about, right? Like reflecting back on our past experiences and gaining that clarity. So I'm so happy that you said that. That's a great point for us to end. I'm sad that we're done with this. We're going to have to chat again because you just have so much amazing knowledge in there that I want to pull out. But where can people find you? Anything that you want to plug before we wrap up?
Yeah, just find me on TikTok at I am Dulma. And then if you want to DM me or follow up on any of these conversations, I love talking about this stuff. So same handle on Instagram at I am Dulma.
All right. Well, definitely check her out. I'll link the links for her social media in the description box below. But Dulma, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.